Opening question. Dragons. How many of you think they were real? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How many of you think they were fictional and mythological?
Dragons.
Maybe the fire-breathing ones are.
The fire-breathing one.
Yeah, the ones that
Are there other kinds
the
of
ones that flew.
Yeah.
Yeah.
What was that one's name?
Yeah, you rode on them.
How many of you think they were mythical and they were just in storybooks? They were mythological. I got 1, 2, 3. How many are voting?
How many are voting?
How many don't know? Okay, all right. Somebody read 12 through 19, or 12 through 21. Chapter 41 of Job.
I will not fail to speak of his limbs, his strength, and his great form. Who can strip off his outer coat? Who would approach him with a bridle? Who dares open the doors of his mouth, ringed about with his fearsome teeth? His back has rows of shields tightly sealed together. Each is so close to the next that no air can pass between them. They are joined fast to one another. They cling together and cannot be parted. His snorting throws out flashes of light. His eyes are like the rays of dawn. Fire brands stream from his mouth. Sparks of fire shoot out. Smoke pours from his nostrils as from a boiling pot over fire of reeds. His breath sets coals ablaze, and fires dart from his mouth.
How many of you think there were dragons?
That almost sounds like some kind of a machine or something.
Yeah.
They're describing it as an animal.
But they didn't have machines in Job's day, so.
Yeah, but maybe he had a dream like.
But if you read the stories about the dragons, they had huge scales, and arrows you had to put the arrows between the scales or in the neck or somewhere. And if you watch the the Hobbit, when they brought down Smaug, he had one scale missing, and they had to put the arrow through the one scale. And a lot of people scoff at the Bible and say, "Oh, that's just a mythological creature that lived that you find in storybooks." And so the Bible's just a storybook with these mythological creatures in it, and all those mythological creatures, if you study them really well, they all have some basis intact. A lot of them are exaggerated. A lot of the stories get bigger than they are, like fishermen tell fish stories. But for the most part, you can go back and you can find things that are similar to the stories. Do we have any evidence today that dragons existed? Now you're afraid to hold up your hand.
Fine. Oh, is it yes or no question?
Yes or no?
Oh, yes. Okay, yes.
I got a yes. Do we have any evidence today that dragons exist? There is a reptile in the Philippines that has 2 glands in his mouth, and when anything gets close to the young or the eggs or threatens it, it opens its mouth. It has very sharp teeth, and it shoots 2 liquids out, and when those 2 liquids meet at the target, they burst into flame. Today, in the Philippines.
Fire starter.
That critter.
Use that as a fire starter. Just hold it.
Who needs Kingsford? All you need is a lizard.
Pull him up, stick his head in the wood stove, and voila.
Sometimes I think my wife is related to it.
Is this being recorded?
Yes.
Yeah.
But it does exist today, but it's a reptile. And remember, we talked about reptiles. They used to live to be 900 years old, and they got bigger and bigger and bigger and became dinosaurs. And today they only live like 20, 30, 40 years old. And they don't get near as big as they used to. But there still is a creature today, it's a miniature of this description. And it's still found in the Philippines, and when it shoots those two chemicals out of its nose and they meet downstream at the target, they burst into flames and can start things on fire. So, is the Bible true or is the Bible not true? Is there evidence or is there not evidence? That's the thing we have to ask ourselves, because let's face it, we're basing all of eternity on what this book says. All of eternity. And the Muslims are basing all of eternity on what the Quran says. And the Buddhists are basing all of eternity on the writings of Buddha. And the Hindus, likewise, and the Shintos, likewise. The voodoo worshipers, the Satan worshipers, everybody who participates in a religion is basing all of eternity on what they choose to believe from their particular book. So how do we know which one's right? Eternity depends on it. How do we know for sure which one's right?
God wrote this one. I said, God wrote this one.
Allah wrote the Quran. Buddha wrote whatever the name of his book is.
Yeah, but Buddha was just another guy, wasn't he?
So was Allah. So was Muhammad.
Yeah, Muhammad was.
But was Jesus just another guy?
No.
They will tell you Buddha was just another guy too. So what's the proof?
The one that
How do
speaks
we
the
know we're
truth.
right?
The one that speaks the truth.
The one that speaks the truth. The one that can be validated. And nobody has ever discredited one word in this book. Not one word. They tried. And another thing too, do we run around trying to discredit the other religions to the extent that the other religions attack us? And why is that? You know, my grandpa had an old saying, and I think he got it from the Quakers, and he would say, I think that they'll protest it too loud, Bill. Usually the guy that makes the most noise is trying to defend something, and the truth does not need to be defended. The truth stands on its own. Okay? What proof is there that Jesus Christ is the Son of God?
Well, he rose from the dead.
He rose from the dead. How do we know that that's not just a fictional story?
There were witnesses.
500 witnesses. Over 500 witnesses saw him in the 45 days after he rose from the dead. Over 500 people witnessed him. Okay? All kind of Jewish writers and Roman writers wrote about it, and they weren't religious. They weren't priests. They weren't trying to write religious documents to establish religion. They were just writing historical documents. They were just writing down information of their time. They were trying to write historical dialogue so that you would know what happened in the 3rd year AD. They weren't trying to prove a point. They weren't trying to be Baptists or Methodists or Catholics and state their cause. They were just writing down what happened. And it's documented over and over and over and over again. Is there any conflicts in this Bible? The Bible was written over 1,500 years by 40 different authors on 3 different continents, most of which never knew each other, except for the New Testament. all those guys were disciples or knew the disciples. But if you go back into the Old Testament, most of those guys had no idea what the other guy was doing 3,000 miles away. Are there any conflicts in any of their writings? No. You can't get two people to agree on anything after 10 minutes in a warm room. Okay? But 40 men wrote 66 books from 3 different continents over 1,500 years, and they all perfectly agreed to the word. Does that give you some proof? Okay. Okay, personally, how do you know it's the truth? Has what the Bible says changed your life for the good, for the bad? Has it made no change at all? Let's have some testimony. Has it made a difference in your life?
Sure it has.
Sure it has. Absolutely it has. The Buddhists are taught to endure. The Hindus are taught to endure. The Shintos are taught to endure. The Muslims are taught to endure. We are taught that we have eternal life and will rise victorious. Now, there are things we have to endure. The world, why do you think the world is big on persecuting Christianity, but they don't seem to care anything about the Buddhists or the Muslims or the Hindus or any of that? How do we get so many religions anyway? One God, one couple.
A lot of your religions came from basically one religion, but things like, just like people's last names, you know, when you have conflicts in the church and then they leave the church, and they have their own ideas and they start their own church, and then you get another religion. Most of the
You
time.
get another denomination. But what about Buddhists and Hindus and all of those? How did they get started? Satan had to create a counterfeit in order to steal the souls of God. And so he created all these counterfeits, but there's no power in them. There's no power to change lives, there's no power to heal, there's no power to, in the hereafter. It's just endure, live a good life, and when you come back the next time, you'll get to be a cat.
Well, that sounds like getting sent to hell to me. but-
That's the Hindu version of things. What?
I said, that sounds like getting sent to hell to me.
Ending up packaged in somebody's freezer.
We're at McDonald's.
I don't.
That's not really beef.
I don't see the allure myself, but you know. But the bottom line is we have to make sure we know what we believe is true, because all eternity rests on it. And so we look here and it says there were dragons. His breath sets coals ablaze. Flames dart from his mouth. Smoke pours from his nostrils. Now, what God is trying to say here is, my creation is mighty and massive and spectacular, and I have created things so that you could see my power, so that you could know my nature, so that you could rely on what I say. And the world runs around and they say, "Oh, that can't be true. That's just the Bible's just a bunch of stories." Not a bunch of stories. And we have proof even today that these kind of creatures sea serpents, 3 weeks ago, one washed up on shore. Big. I didn't get all the data on it, but they have washed up on shore 150 foot long. And that's after the sharks had their way with them. And those are big critters. We got Nessie and Loch Ness.
Bigfoot. Bigfoot. Sasquatch.
Yes, that's what it is. You know, personally, I would like to see one. But I look in the Bible and I find evidence that these things probably did exist and still do exist. Japanese trollers have been trolling for cod and whatever, and just have had their nets ripped to shreds because they caught something that was so powerful it just tore them apart. Now these nets can bring in 10, 15 tons of fish at a time. They're huge and they're strong, and they load tons of fish from these nets in one pass. And all of a sudden we run into something that just rips them to shreds. What was it, a submarine or, you know? But the evidence is there, and the evidence is in the Bible, and we can rely on it.
But what about, I remember you told me one time there was giant people too, wasn't there?
Oh yeah. If you go on to YouTube this afternoon and type in giants, just go to youtube.com and type in giants. And they've got these huge fossilized skeletons that they found on top of mountains, where they buried them or where they laid them. And they think they buried them on the mountains, and then erosion uncovered them. And these huge, monstrous skulls and bones and fossilized bones of these things. They found them several places. And if you go back into Genesis, chapter 4, 5, 6, along in there, it talks about the great giants. And it talks about that they were the offspring of the fallen angels and the daughters of men. And after the flood, God put those fallen angels in the pit so that they could no longer lay with the daughters of men. Because they were creating these huge giants, and these huge giants were pretty oppressive to the population. I mean, the biggest guy, remember high school, the biggest guy tended to be a bully and push his way around. Well, you got Goliath and all of his brothers, and that's documented, and they were bullies. They tended to be evil, and they tended to throw their weight around. So yeah, there were giants, and we've still got the bones today. Hey, go on YouTube and look at it. The bones are there, the graves are there, the skulls are there. This guy's holding up this skull, and it's as wide as his body. And there's dozens and dozens and dozens of YouTube videos that you can watch. Yep, there were giants. And the evidence is there. 22 to the end.
Strength resides in his neck, dismay goes before him. The tumult of his flesh are tightly joined, they are firm and immovable. His chest is hard as rock, hard as a lower millstone. When he rises up, the mighty are terrified, they retreat before his thrashing. The sword that reaches him has no effect, nor does the spear or the dart or the javelin. Iron he treats like straw, and bronze like rotten wood. Arrows do not make him flee. Slingshots are like chaff to him. A club seems to him but a piece of straw. He laughs at the rattling of the lance. His undersides are jagged potsherds, leaving a trail in the mud like a threshing sledge. He makes the depths churn like a boiling cauldron and stirs up the sea like a pot of ointment. Behind him he leaves a glistening wake. One would think the deep had white hair. Nothing on earth is his equal, a creature without fear. He looks down on all that are haughty. He is king over all that are proud.
God's basically saying, you can see my might and my power in my creation. Okay? And if you go to Romans chapter 1, it says the same thing. If you want to know the characteristics of God, you can find him in the trees, in the rivers, in the sun, in all of creation. He put his essence there so that we could see his characteristics. And then it makes a statement at the end of that. It says, so no man is with excuse. None of us have an excuse for not believing in God. Why do you think the natives in the jungles who have never heard the name Jesus or the name Jehovah worship the trees and the rivers and the sun
Because God's shown
and the
himself.
storms? What?
God's shown himself in those things. God has shown himself in those things.
God has showed himself in all of his creation, and they see God in those things. They see provision in those things. They see salvation in those things. They see protection in those things. And because they see all those things, they honor them. They don't know what his name is. They don't know that he's 3 in 1. They don't have a Bible. But just common sense tells them that there is a higher power there that is taking care of them. Now, how much different is that from what we believe? No. We have been taught the Bible, and so we don't have to look at the trees to see God. But on the other hand, if we didn't have the Bible, we could just look at science and know that this could not have happened by accident. I don't care how many years there.
I don't believe we'd have the science.
What?
If we didn't have the Bible, I don't believe we'd have the science, because it was man's intelligence that's driving to get the hardcore concrete evidence to dispute the Bible. If we didn't have the Bible, look where the Indians were. They were primitive. They were so primitive.
Yep.
They just did on their own.
That's a good
And they
point.
had their religion, and they were at peace.
Yep. That's a good point. The Bible takes the reality and makes it livable. That's a very good point.
That's how, if I ever get in a discussion with somebody and they're trying to throw the science at the Bible, I'm like, okay, where did the intelligence come from to drive that? It's a God-given gift.
Exactly. We've got one more chapter in Job, and in Job's history. What do you want to study next? Don't have to tell me today, but I would like a little time to prepare the next lesson. So think about it and come with your ideas next week. I already have one idea. But it's up to you. It's your class. We can study a book in the Bible, or we can study what the Bible says about something that you're concerned about. Okay? Raising children, finances, faith. If there's a word in the Bible that just perplexes you, what does faith mean? What does propitiation mean? What does it mean when it says God is glorious? It doesn't matter to me. It's your class, and I'll teach on whatever you have a question about. But it has to be in the Bible. We can't study the rapture because the rapture's not in the Bible. Okay? I can point you toward 1,000 books written on it, but I can't show you one place in the Bible where the word rapture is written. So we can't study the rapture. I can tell you why it's not in the Bible, but we can't spend a lot of time studying something that the Bible. This is Sunday school and this is church, and so we're going to study the Bible. So, whatever you want to study, I'm game. sometimes people email me and say, what about the gay movement? And so I respond to it. And sometimes I respond in 4, 5, or 6 messages. But I got that one a couple of weeks ago. Somebody wanted to know why we're opposed to the gay movement, and I responded. And whatever it is, whatever you want to look at, whatever you want to study, we will study. Okay? So be thinking about it. Now, do you have any questions on anything in Job up to 42? You have any questions on today?
Where can we get one of those lizards?
Only fire starters.
Can we get one of those fire starters?
Where do you get one?
Indonesia, is that what you said?
It's kind of like owning a python. It's not a good idea. Okay, we go.